How's it going, everybody? It's Master1994 here, and today we're going to take a look at my Shadow Priest PvP build, and then we're going to watch some 2100 plus arena gameplay. Now, as always, there is a table of contents in the description below, so if you would like to skip any part of the video, go ahead and take a look at that table of contents, and you should find exactly what you'd like to see. Now here we can see that I did manage to get 2200 with the Shadow Priest, so let's take a look at the build. As we talk about the build, do note that my build is not necessarily based around the meta, and instead is based on my personal preference. However, when I stray from the meta, as always, I will let you guys know. Also note that the Shadow Priest has some pretty effective defensive cooldowns and a pretty strong CC and burst chain that we'll talk about throughout the video. On this first row, we're using Shadowy Insight, the extra Mind Blast on the proc and then them being instant so you're not getting interrupted. It's very effective, especially when you get these procs during your burst chain. Some people are using Shadow Word Void, which, it's understandable, an extra charge, a little bit more insanity per cast, but in my opinion, Shadowy Insight is kind of too strong to pass up right now, and this does appear to be the meta. Next, we're using Intangibility. With this talent and the changes to Dispersion in 8.1, Dispersion honestly seems to be one of the best defensives in the game right now. So, this 30-second reduced cooldown is just icing on the cake. Very strong talent. Next, we're using Misery. One less global every time you dot somebody up. It is arguable that you would be dotting people before you burst, and Twist of Fate would really help you during burst windows, and it would help you secure kills, and also it would have more synergy with Shadow Word Death. But the overall DPS increase from having fewer globals when you're dotting people is pretty strong right now. Next, this is more preference between Mind Bomb and Psychic Horror. I really like Psychic Horror because it's on a 45-second cooldown, and that 45-second cooldown, your Silence, your Psyfiend both have 45-second cooldowns. So basically, this allows you to have kind of a burst CC chain on a 45-second cooldown. I also don't really like replacing the Fear and Psychic Horror with Mind Bomb. So in my opinion, I was pretty much always going with Psychic Horror. Next, we see some Auspicious Spirits sometimes, a little bit more damage, a little bit more insanity generation, but I really like the Shadow Priest Execute. 20% health is pretty low, but if you get someone there and start casting those Shadow Word Deaths, it's a lot easier to secure the kills with this talent. Also note that this ability actually does more damage than your Mind Blasts and your Void Bolts. It's only second to the initial Void Eruption damage. So it's a pretty strong ability. Instant cast, 2 charges. Again, one of those that I just really don't want to pass up. Next, I'm using Lingering Insanity. I really don't want to play with Mindbender just because it's a minute cooldown. And again, a lot of my other abilities have a 45-second cooldown. So 15 seconds longer than my main CC chain. It's kind of hard to fit it in, I don't want to burst every minute. I would rather burst every 45 seconds. And also, Lingering Insanity is very strong right now. You're going to keep that haste buff after Void Form ends, allowing you to enter Void Form quicker because you're going to be using abilities quicker. And it's going to help you, heal your teammates and support more efficiently. Or rather more effectively. So I really like Lingering Insanity. When I switched from Mindbender to Lingering Insanity, it was, night and day. It just felt so much smoother as a class. Lastly, we're using Legacy of the Void. I'm not using the PvP talent Void Origins, so the reduced cast time is pretty strong for me. Also, an extra 5% spell damage increase during Void Form is way too much to pass up right now. This is pretty much meta, but just note I'm not using Dark Ascension again because it has that 1 minute cooldown, and my main burst and CC chain has a 45-second cooldown. Now as for PvP talents, almost as always, I'm using the trinket. You know, we all want the trinket for the most part. For the actual PvP talents, it seems like pretty much everyone's picking up Void Shift, and then the remaining two PvP talents are between Psyfiend, Greater Fade, and Void Origins. Now, I really like Greater Fade. I think the defense is just too strong to pass up. I mean, being able to basically not take any direct damage for 4 seconds is very strong. Do note that you can still be interrupted while you're using Greater Fade, and if you use any offensive abilities, it will cancel Greater Fade. So it lasts for 4 seconds or until you use an offensive ability. I also like Psyfiend because, you know, as always, I wasn't really using voice communications. And so I was bursting a little bit more independently. And Psyfiend is very strong, very effective at bursting independently, especially with that 50% reduced healing. And we will talk a lot more about Psyfiend throughout the gameplay portion of the video. As far as stat allocation goes, we're going with Mastery over Haste and Versatility over Crit. Now, I've deemed Haste and Versatility about equal because, you know, Haste has been strong this entire expansion, and it's really going to help us with our dot damage. And Versatility, you know, the flat damage increase and us being a little bit more tanky is going to help because sometimes we are the kill target, and Shadow has very strong defensive cooldowns, but not a ton of just sustained tankiness. However, Mastery is number one because it just gives us a flat damage increase to most of our damaging abilities. And Crit, as always, is last because, as we know by now, it has 50% reduced effectiveness in PvP. We're going to quickly go over a few of the more notable Azerite traits, one of which is Thought Harvester. Basically just increasing our vampiric touch by a flat amount. Obviously note that this is an increased damage per tick and not per the full 20-second duration, so it's actually a pretty significant damage increase. It also allows our vampiric touches to give us a proc that makes our Mind Seers do a pretty significant amount of damage. So with this proc, Mind Seer is actually useful. so it's nice. Spiteful Apparitions is also a very strong Azerite trait, just more shadowy apparition damage. Do note I did some testing, and the 100% increased damage with Auspicious Spirits does not increase the damage of Spiteful Apparitions by 100%. So basically it would double your shadowy apparition damage and then add the Spiteful Apparitions damage instead of just doubling both. So I think the most notable characteristic of the Shadow Priest, and probably why I enjoyed it so much, is the fact that you can really support your team, and then with almost a flip of a switch, you can start this burst and CC chain that is really strong enough to be used independently and still get kills sometimes. And when you're using this in conjunction with your other team's burst and CC chains, it's out of this world. And this burst and CC chain usually consists of a Void Eruption, you know, starting that burst damage into a Psyfiend on the kill target. And I played around with it a little bit, but ultimately I decided that I like to use my Psyfiend first, and then once the enemy team kills the Psyfiend, now that the kill target is taking full healing, that's when you start the CC chain on the healers. And you're really going to maximize that window, that opportunity that you have to kill the target. And we're going to see that throughout this video. Pretty much all of the gameplay clips we see here, the kills are, you know, within my burst chains. It was all about setting up those CC and those burst chains. And obviously it's really important to synergize with your team, but note that, I mean, I got 2200 without using voice communications because this chain is so strong just by itself. So just imagine what you can do when you use voice communications and are really much more efficient and effective in terms of just working together. I also mentioned, how important our support is as a Shadow Priest. We've got the heals, we've got all that good stuff, but one really important thing is a Mass Dispel, and we're about to see a pretty awesome Mass Dispel. I obviously saw the Ice Block coming. Boom, dead. He was in an Ice Block for, half a second, and the healer was CC'd the whole time. Sometimes we're getting healers out of crowd controls with my Mass Dispel. Right here, we get it out of a trap. I didn't really utilize Mass Dispel enough, I don't think, but it's something that you have. It's a tool that you need to use. Take out those CCs, get rid of those ice blocks. If you're fighting a team where you don't think that you're going to have to be Mass Dispelling a lot, sometimes I was fighting a Shadow Priest team and we were all we were all dotted up, but we were at a point where we were all line of sighting each other. Well, I might use a Mass Dispel to just clear off all those dots. I did that a few times. I even did that. I got interrupted out of Shadow. Well, I can use a Mass Dispel and clear everyone's dots. At least I can help a little bit. Obviously, it's super important to keep up those Shadow Mans. I pretty much kept bubbles on my teammates all the time. That's pretty much where my mana went. And that's really the biggest downside to supporting. With my playstyle, I really like to keep my teammates alive. And so I felt like there were a few moments where I was a little mana starved and couldn't pull off that Mass Dispel that I needed. There was a Mass Dispel, a trap that I couldn't dispel because I didn't have enough mana. Or maybe, I didn't get to Mass Dispel a Pally Bubble because I had been healing the whole time. I also really liked using Vampiric Touch. It's such an amazing ability when your teammates are getting low. It's great to be able to heal while you're doing damage. So it's one of my most favorite abilities. It's very flavorful. But just keep in mind that you have a lot of utility. And my damage numbers in total weren't always amazing because I was doing a lot of healing. But it's not about sustained damage all the time. A lot of the times, and especially in the arena situations, it's usually about those burst windows. So keeping your teammates alive throughout your enemy's burst windows, and then turning around and flipping that switch that I mentioned, and starting those chains, those CC and burst chains, and getting the kill, it's really where the Shadow Priest excels. And I think it's a very fun playstyle. I've been doing a lot of these, hybrid type builds lately. The Discipline Priest, the Protection Paladin, and I feel like this almost fits in there. And it was a ton of fun to play because you really feel like you're very important. You feel like you're a huge asset to your team, especially when almost all your kills are coming from your burst and your CC chain. But people are almost dying and you're void swapping or void shifting them, and you're bubbling everybody, and you're shadow mending people when you can, and you're healing through Vampiric Touch. You just feel very important, and it's nice to be a caster that's so versatile and can really be in people's faces when it comes to the burst. On top of all that, you're relatively tanky, especially compared to what Shadow Priests used to be. We have really awesome defensive cooldowns. I've obviously already bragged about Dispersion, but Greater Fade is pretty awesome too. Making all attacks miss you for 4 seconds on just a 45-second cooldown is pretty amazing. On top of all the bubbles, on top of the Vampiric Touch, self-healing, you're relatively hard to kill. So people sometimes go after you to lock down the caster, that kind of thing. But if you're playing with another caster, you are very rarely the kill target. That kind of leads me into my next discussion, which is what compositions do you want to play? I really enjoyed playing caster cleaves with the Shadow Priest. Mages and warlocks were my all-time favorite teammates. That being said, the Shadow Priest is so versatile that you can really play with pretty much anything. I mean, I had some luck with rogues. I really liked playing with Unholy DKs and Retribution Pallies. Obviously, I liked the casters, mages, warlocks, elemental shaman, enhancement shaman were good too. I mean, there's really not a huge limit. I even played with a survival hunter, and that wasn't bad either. Especially if you're using voice communications, I can only imagine using the CC chains in conjunction with a hunter trap, right? So I think, if you have friends that you want to play with, it doesn't really matter all that much what class and what spec they're playing. But my favorite compositions were definitely with the caster cleaves. Ultimately, the Shadow Priest was one of the most enjoyable classes I've ever played. It's very unique. And this was the first time I had really pushed with a Shadow Priest, and I felt like it was relatively easy to pick up. After the basics and after, really figuring out how versatile you really are, it's really a strong specialization. And, I would kind of suggest it to the same people I would suggest, maybe discipline or protection paladins to. If you want to support your team, this is a good specialization for that. However, it's just so offensive at the same time, you're really going to feel like a huge asset to your team. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and conclude here, guys. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay tuned as I have plenty more content coming up soon, so I'll catch y'all next time.